our roll call, we have everyone here on the board except for Kristen Swetland and Emma Reichert.
Kristen's walking in.
She's walking in right now.
Okay. If everyone can check your cell phones, make sure they're turned off, please. Our only item on the agenda tonight is discussion of traffic and transportation in the city. I think this has become our favorite subject lately. So, Teresa, are we turning it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Because we have a different setting tonight, I think it would be nice for us to have an introduction so that you also be introduced to the new members that are participating in the work session. So I'm Teresa Greer, Development Service Director for the city.
Bonnie Groot, Assistant City Attorney.
Kathy Moore, Chairman of the Board.
Darrell Lopez, Vice Chair.
Larry Wright, board member.
Kurt Gashlin, board member.
Kristen Swetland, Board Member.
Todd Sykes, board member.
Jim Clark, Rhythm Engineering, and also a citizen of Oviedo.
Kakwan Ma with VHB, consultant to the city.
Bobby Wyatt, Public Works Director.
Jay Higbee, Development Review.
Anach Whitfield, Planning Manager.
So thank you all for coming. We have prepared a brief presentation. The idea is really to answer your questions, and so we have an open discussion. The only clarification I want to make before the meeting that tonight we are not going to talk about any specific project. We're going to talk about traffic in the city, and for sure we should not discuss any project that is in the pipeline to be considered by the board. Anach has prepared a 13-slide presentation. She'll go over that, and then we'll open for discussions. Okay?
Thank you, Teresa. Good evening, Madam Chairman, board members, and guests. Make sure this works. So this is the agenda that we're going to cover this evening. The timeline, the transportation planning timeline that we shared with the majority of the board a couple months back, and we're bringing it again for our new board members so that they're aware of the policies that we're operating under. The next slide will be covering the concerns that staff understood from the board at the meeting where we discussed the agenda for today's work session. The timeline for when the comp plan should be updated. A few slides on the factors and the plans that are currently in effect in the city that influences growth and the development patterns that we have in the city. One slide on economic development, a slide on funding and roadway priorities, talking about how we can fund our projects and the priorities that the city currently has. And the last remaining slides are discussion items on how we can manage expectations on public infrastructure and public utilities as it relates to transportation and projects. And then the very last slide is discussion. So my thought is that we go through the PowerPoint first so that it should only take about 8 minutes, so that we leave the rest of the time for discussion and Q&A. Okay. So most of you have seen this slide before. It's got a lot of information on it. The main thing is to paint the picture of where we are, the policy direction that the city went into back in the early 90s and early 2000s. In the green box, you see that in 1991, that comprehensive plan had established level of service standards for our arterials, collectors, some constrained roadway facilities, the commuter routes, predominantly Mitchell-Hammock Road. And you'll see there that the comp plan did not have a level of service standard for local roads. Advancing a few years, in 2001, the city experienced a lot of residential growth, so the city as a whole decided to develop a downtown master plan. That plan was adopted in the 2002-1 timeframe. At about that same time, the city adopted a transportation concurrency exception area for a portion, the downtown portion of the city. So what that means is that projects that are occurring in those areas aren't subject to transportation concurrency. Projects that occur outside of the exception area are still subject to transportation concurrency. The transition from the 2002 timeframe when the TCA was adopted to now, that TCA line hasn't changed in the city. The comp plan was updated in 2002. As you can see it's a little hard to see, I apologize for that. I can provide copies in paper copies. The level of service standards that were adopted did not change much, except that local roads then had a level of service C standard. Interestingly, during that time frame between 2002 to 6 and 8, the state legislation adopted new requirements that it changed the definition of how roads are defined as backlog facilities. What that translates to for the local governments is that once a road is actually defined or deemed deficient or backlogged, the development community isn't the responsible party for upgrading or increasing capacities. It falls on the local governments to do that. And then around the 2006 timeframe, the city identified a CRA. We adopted a CRA. The boundaries of that is essentially coterminous with the TCA, so new development is encouraged inside of the CRA area, and those new developments are not subject to transportation concurrency. So they would look at impacts, but they could move forward without having to meet the test of concurrency. In 2008, the city adopted the Transportation Master Plan. That is the plan that we shared with the board last time. The previous one had I shared with you to 2009 and 2017. I have a copy of the 2017 here with me. We, as I understand it, and Mr. Wyatt is here from Public Works to correct me if I misspeak, that plan hasn't changed much. The only thing that's happened is being updated as projects are completed. Correct, Bobby? And then in around the 2009 timeframe, the legislation mandated more changes as it relates to transportation, in that it designated some communities with a certain population density as dense urban land areas. As far as the state is concerned, those areas are also considered exemption areas for transportation concurrency. The city of Oviedo is one of those entities, and that designation is updated annually by the State Department. And then the city, based on 2009 data, we updated our comp plan and adopted the 2010 comp plan, which is the one that's currently in effect, and that was in November of 2010. And as you can see there in the red box, there were some changes to the level of service standards to reflect that the city in the 2010 time period was willing to accept a greater level of congestion along our roadways. And there's been no changes to the adopted level of service standards since 2010, this current comp plan. And then shortly after the city adopted the 2010 comp plan, the last major state legislation in 2011 removes state-mandated transportation concurrency altogether. So those are the big changes that has evolved over the years for the city, which is, those are the standards that we review all of our projects against, whether the project is coming in at the site plan level or at the very beginning at the entitlements level at a comprehensive plan amendment. So this is a brief slide that shows, and I hope that we captured this correctly based on our conversation with the board last time. Your biggest concern is transportation, specifically as it relates to the traffic counts and the methodology that is used by the county to collect those counts on an annual basis. We've asked our transportation consultant here, he's a traffic engineer, to talk about the methodology that the county uses, how the counts are collected, how they're used, and how congestion is defined at a segment level and at an intersection level. Because this work session is mostly on transportation, we're going to table the discussion on parking and the mixed-use densities in Oviedo in the Park to a later time. Same thing with the demographics comment that was raised by one of the board members last time. In terms of the timeline for the comp plan, as I mentioned earlier, the current comp plan that we're working under has a 2025 horizon. That is our sunset year. Right now, we do have to update the comprehensive plan in the very near future. Statutes requires that each local government's comprehensive plan has 2 planning horizons, the first one being a 5-year minimum. The next one has to be at least 10 years. So our current plan has a 5-year, 15-year. So when we update our comp plan this round, it'll be a 2025, 2030, 35 time horizon. So when we do that update, we will be updating not only the element policies, goals, objectives, and policies. If they need to be updated, we'll get direction from this board on those policy changes, but we'll also be doing a reevaluation of all the data and inventory and analysis for all the other elements, the future land use, transportation, housing, all the utility elements and sub-elements, recreation and parks, conservation, and things like that. So there'll be more information on that in the future. This slide is the first slide in the series that talks about the factors and plans that influence how our growth has occurred over the years in the city. You guys are all very familiar with the fact that the county has the rural boundary area. Even if properties annex into the city and those properties are inside of that envelope, the city could annex if it meets the requirements in the Florida statutes for annexations. But the entitlements and the development potential still remains with the county through our agreement with the county. So basically, all the cities are on the outside of the rural service area, and then growth is very limited on the east side of the county. This is, I don't know if you guys were on the board when, back in 2006, when the Regional Planning Council, the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, worked with the 9-county area that they cover to develop their How Shall We Grow regional vision. I have a paper copy here that I can pass around if you want to look at the maps closer. But what this regional vision did was it looked at the 9-county area. It looked at the development status quo type of development patterns that were occurring at that time. And as a region, that body developed the 2050 region for the 9-county area that includes us, everybody covered under Metro Plan Orlando. So Orange County, Osceola County, Seminole County, Polk County, Volusia, Brevard, and I'm probably missing a couple others. It was in 2006. They had 20,000 participants, and they identified in this next slide. So this map shows the development patterns of the region if we continue to develop the way we have been. This graphic shows that if we focus development in certain areas, then we would end up saving more conservation areas and corridors, natural corridors that the state and the region wants to preserve. Based on this map and the vision that was developed for the city of Oviedo back in 2006, we're projected to be a medium city with a population of 59,000 to 100,000 by 2050. And right now, in 2018, we're at 39,739. So we are kind of going along that track. This next graphic, basically what we are trying to portray here is pretty much identify Oviedo as kind of like the hub in a wheel, So all the north-south roads are the spokes of the wheel. Essentially, you have Seminole County, Sanford in the north. You have the eastern side of Seminole County, Geneva area, the University of Central Florida, the MCO Airport, Orlando, all the attractions in that direction, Winter Springs. Those trips kind of diverge into those 5 major intersections, and those intersections just happen to be in the city of Oviedo. So in order to go south from Sanford to UCF, for example, they'd have to take 417 or 426 or some other route. They basically converge at those starred intersections. So where we sit geographically, there's very limited east-west movement opportunities. So the properties, the lands around us in Winter Springs and unincorporated Seminole County continues to grow. Even if we were to stop growing, there will still be growth around us. This one is to show that Our development patterns and the project that we see coming to development services, we try to look at those, comparing them to the city's ability to accommodate that project based on capacity. So we have a water supply plan that we are currently in the process of updating. We have to update the water supply plan within 18 months of the Water Management District updating its regional water supply plan. So we're looking at our current one now, because the Water Management District has updated theirs, so now it's time for us to update ours. Our current population, I mentioned there, is 39,700. Our 2018 Giraffe water supply plan projects a serving population of 50,450 by 2035 and 53 by 2040. So our growth, regardless of the densities and intensities in the entitlements of a future land use designation, is truly limited by the amount of water that we can actually withdraw from our groundwater resources through our consumptive use permit that's issued by St. John's River Water Management District. We are also guided by the comp plan. As I mentioned in the second slide, the levels of service standards, we can't exceed those. And as you can see, the standards haven't changed much since 2002. I do want to point out, though, that the standard at that time did anticipate some level of congestion along the arterials and collectors. The TCA and mobility areas, we try to focus growth in those areas, in development corridors, and the policies in the comp plan try to get as much interconnectivity between new developments as possible. Really briefly on economic development, the CRA boundary, as I mentioned, it encompasses the old downtown area, so the core and the perimeter, as well as the new downtown area and the areas in between. It's about 674 acres. The CRA TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing Trust Fund, which was adopted and developed in 2010, has experienced an 86.4% increase with the development of Oviedo in the Park for that area. I spoke with John Jones at the end of last week. This number is based on 2016. He did confirm that the valuation is continuing to increase. Those funds from the TIF fund program goes towards infrastructure projects, and at this time, a lot of those projects are utility projects. And that's just a bullet that I took from the city's adopted master plan for the CRA. The next slide is talking about the funding options that the city has and the road projects and our priorities. So we have just a small handful of funding opportunities, partnership projects we rely on, operational improvements, transportation impact fees, and just FYI, the city's transportation impact fees right now is already a multimodal impact fee, which means that those funds collected can be used towards capacity improvements for other modes than just vehicular. So it can go towards other capacity improvements that are not just road widening, or road capacity related. It could go towards sidewalks, trails, any other mode of moving people. The mobility fund for projects having, there is a mitigation option that projects can contribute towards. Taxes, no one wants to increase taxes. Grants and technical assistance, and the list on the right are all the projects that the city has prioritized in the coming years. If you have specific questions on those projects, Mr. White can answer that. The main thing that this slide is that we want to put forward with this slide is that it's complicated to have multiple projects going on at the same time because of maintenance of traffic. You have to divert. With all of our east-west limitations, you have to be careful in how you divert traffic so that people aren't going from one construction project and sit to go to another construction project and sit. This slide is on managing expectations. We had, I think, talked about this briefly last time. What are people's expectations? I'm not going to read this list. We'll talk about it once we start the conversation. But I want to hopefully try to point out that we are essentially growing in accordance with the master land use, the master plans, specifically the water supply plan, the transportation plan, and the comp plan. as well as the RPC's regional plan for our little piece of the pie. The factors, these are things that staff came up with. It's not an all-inclusive list. You know, it'll come out in the conversation, but you know, we want to take advantage of the technology that is coming forward. That's why we invited Mr. Clark here. Rhythm engineering is right now, I think, is one of the leaders in the technology on how to use the signals, the traffic signals, to help move traffic better, as he explained to us last week when we met with him just for a quick meet and greet. The signal improvements from the in-sync system, which Mr. Clark can speak to in more detail, is not intended to address a system that's already saturated with cars. It's to help move them more efficiently through the intersection. As a planning division, we like to start looking at cars as assets as service instead of assets. So considering when we're looking at plans for sites, you know, creating opportunities for car sharing, ride sharing, Uber, kiss and drop, what is it called? Kiss and ride lots, park and ride lots, those kinds of things to help, you know, get people moving without necessarily providing the parking accommodations and things like that. So these are, you know, things that we can think about. So with that, I want to take us into the discussion, and I want to transition over. If you guys don't have any questions about any slides, we can transition over and have Kakwan explain the traffic count methodology, and then we can go from there. So, Kakwan?
The traffic count methodology with respect to...
The county's, Seminole County's traffic
Right.
methodology.
So Seminole County has adopted capacity based on a daily level of service, and it's not the most common way of determining level of service. Most jurisdictions will look at it on a peak hour or peak hour peak direction. The county, though, has adopted daily, and the cities within within Seminole County also follow that. So the way that the traffic counts are conducted, usually once a year, you'll see the tubes across all of the different roads, and they're counted over a 72-hour period. That 72-hour period, then those 3 days are averaged, and a seasonal factor is applied. Over the course of a year, traffic comes up and down depending on what holidays, schools, things like that. And so whenever those counts are conducted, they're going to be done on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so typical weekday. And then the seasonal factor is applied once those 3 days are averaged. Those counts then go into, are certified, and then they go into their database. And that's done once a year. The capacities for each one of the roads, the county can adopt a generalized level of service capacity. The generalized level of service capacity tables are developed by Florida Department of Transportation. They can also conduct detailed analyses to determine if the capacities on certain roads should be higher or lower. So the adopted capacities that Seminole County uses is a combination of the two.
We have questions now?
Yes.
One of the questions I have, I'll start us off, Daryl.
Please.
And the thing that you gave us with all of the past traffic studies on it, there was the one Oviedo Corridor Feasibility Study final report from '96. I found a sentence in there that said that the county and the city calculate their capacity and level of services differently. So are you saying that now the city is relying on the county, so we are doing it the same way?
The cities can adopt a different level of service capacity than a jurisdiction. So it can be different from county roads or from state roads. FDOT also has their adopted level of service. if the city adopts a level of service that is different, what it would be listed in the land development or comp plan, transportation element of the comp plan. I have not checked to see how the adopted level of service compares between the city and the county, but in the studies that I've looked at and reviewed for the city, all the roads that I can think of have used the same level of service standard.
But are they calculating it differently to get to that level of service? Or is the city just using the numbers the county gives us?
The city uses the numbers that the county uses for the capacity.
Okay. That answers that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to go visit your 72-hour trial. Count days? Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. What time of the year is that done?
I don't conduct those for the county.
So you have no idea?
I have no idea.
Okay. Who writes the algorithm to analyze those numbers?
Who writes the algorithm?
You're the traffic engineer. You should have these answers.
Well, the counts are just being done by cars that go over the tubes. The ratio of the heavy vehicles are taken out and adjusted so that there's an axle factor applied. And then the raw counts are just averaged over the 3 days with the seasonal factor applied to that.
So you really don't have a good answer.
No, that is the algorithm.
But who wrote that algorithm? How do you justify an empty dump truck with a full dump truck?
That is not taken into consideration.
Thank you. So, and now what roads in Oviedo are monitored in these 3-day period, which I think is bogus, but 2-day period, excuse me.
Which roads in Oviedo? I don't know. I can't give you a whole list of the roads right now.
So how can we make a judgment or make any kind of decision on this board without having full detail and knowledge? I mean, it seems to me, with all due respect, you have no information for us.
All of the significant roads in Oviedo are collected. Of course, all of the state roads, all of the county roads. With respect to the city roads, significant ones like Mitchell Hammock, Alexandria, Alafaya Woods, all of those are collected.
At what points?
Mr. Lopez, the Excel spreadsheet that we provided before has the 33 segments and roadways and segments, the 2 problems that we've been monitoring over the years.
And do you monitor the same segments each time?
And you don't know what time of year it's done?
I do not know.
Do we know?
If it's like DOT, it's usually during the time that school's in session. So it wouldn't be during the holiday, like the summer months.
Any other questions?
I don't have any questions on the council.
Okay, we can move on.
Could you explain congestion by sections and the intersections?
Sure. Congestion by, for an intersection, it's relatively easy. It's just based on the delay at the intersection. It's also based on the volume to capacity for the intersection, or VC ratio. So the longer a vehicle has to wait, or the more vehicles that you have under demand, compared to the amount of green time you have, will determine the congestion at an intersection. For a segment, it's simply the capacity of the road and as a denominator, and then the volume of traffic. So it's straight VC for that.
Can you explain that again?
Sure. So if a capacity of a road is, let's say it's 1,000, and 1,000 during the peak hour, okay? And you have 750 vehicles that are able to pass that point during that peak hour. Then your VC, or volume to capacity, is 0.75. When that VC reaches 1, then you're at capacity, and then after that, it becomes saturated.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I do, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wright?
So for the benefit of the board, one of the things that we typically come with in any agenda item that comes before us that requires some level of decision-making on our part, we'll get the staff report. In many cases, if there is a impact or a need to decide whether there's an impact to traffic, internally, we don't do that. It goes to our consultant. So one of the things, and again, for our benefit, is that I looked at was that a lot of times it really is nothing more than a sentence or two that city traffic engineers reviewed this and found that there are no impacts. So I guess I have an understanding of it, but for everybody else's benefit, I think I'd like to kind of understand from when you review a project, when a task order has been given to you to review something, the criteria that you're using. You know, are you typically just using the level of service? Again, there's words that we've dropped: congestion, we have intersections, we have, other stuff, but the basis of how you come up with your recommendations, that would help, I think, us have a better understanding without having our traffic engineer at every board meeting.
So whether I'm reviewing for Oviedo, whether I'm reviewing for Daytona or anybody else, first step I do is take the local jurisdiction's requirements or transportation requirements and understand those. For City of Oviedo, it's located in their Land Development Code, Section 9.4. That dictates the guidelines by which I will conduct my review. And from there, once I receive the first step would be to have the applicant or developer submit a methodology letter that says how they want to conduct the traffic study. And I will, usually they'll request a meeting, and we'll sit with them to go through each one of those sections, make sure that we are in agreement on how that traffic study should be conducted. And both sides will sign off. Usually it'll go through one round of comments, whether it's what their build-out year is, how they determine their growth rates, which transportation model they will use, if they've provided a preliminary distribution of how their project traffic will distribute within the study area, whether that's reasonable. And once we all agree on that, then they have an approved methodology, and they'll conduct their traffic study. We'll receive their traffic study, and it goes through the first round of reviews. First round of reviews, depending on how large of a project it is, I might have 5 comments, I might have 50 comments. And all of those comments are listed out, and then they go to the city. The city will review and see if and provide any input that they might have, and then those comments get forwarded to the applicant or the applicant's consultant, and they will respond. So it's a comment and response format. Once I receive those responses, I'll go through those, and then it goes through a round of sufficiency. For sufficiency, I'll go through each one of the responses and state whether or not they have responded sufficiently to the comment. If they haven't, I'll make a note of that. If the study includes any changes, then I am permitted to review those changes and see if I have any new comments based on that. And this sufficiency can go through 1 or 2 rounds or even more. So it usually goes through 2 rounds of sufficiency on most of the larger developments. And then there is a recommendation of approval or denial based on the technical merits of that traffic study. And that gets forwarded to the city.
Let me just add to Mr. Wright that as part of COC 1's review, we look at whether or not they're using the appropriate edition of the ITE manual, whether or not they're using the ITE code that we would agree with. We've had some use like a standard apartment code instead of the mid-rise, high-rise, low-rise, things like that. So we verify those to make sure that whatever IT code they are using is reflective of the use that they're actually wanting to build. So,
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Mr. Lopez?
He made a comment in his statement there that they sit down with the developer and come up with a standard of how they're going to evaluate the project. Why are we don't have a standard that has to be gone by, opposed to sitting down with a developer and coming up with a game plan that's going to be manipulated by that developer? To me, it seems like a flaw that we're letting our consultant and the developer sit down and come up with a strategy on how they're going to do the count.
we actually have a
And
methodology.
that's basically what you said, is that correct? Am I not putting words, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you basically said something to that effect, right?
When we sit down to go through the methodology, we want to make sure that the methodology follows the standards that the city has set forth in their land development code.
Okay, so you're correcting what you said then?
Yes.
No, what
Okay.
Clarifying.
Okay.
clarify that we have in our land development code the standards.
Okay.
When they sit down with the developer, and we are part of this meeting as well, we check that the methodology is compliant with the land development code.
Okay.
Mr. Wright?
Hello. So, thank you. And to follow up on Darrell's comment about methodology, thank you for clarifying. So, I mean, we have a set of guidelines that you follow, and obviously can make decisions based on the specific, whatever the development is of the region, I don't know. So, at the end of the day, I guess what I was trying to drill down to is that when the final decision is that, and I use the word, that there is sufficient capacity on the road. We're not determining as a city, or you're not determining the capacity on the road. Is that already predefined by Seminole County or by the type of road?
It's defined by either the county or by the city in their comprehensive plan.
For us, it's defined by our comp plan,
For our
for our roads. Yeah.
city will be
So
Like-
we
like we
determine-
wouldn't have any
We've
jurisdictional
determined the
or-
capacity, and the calculation for that is based on, obviously, the type of facility, the number of lanes, the speed, the number of intersections. all
And the
that.
amount of congestion the city is willing to tolerate.
That's the levels of service. So one thing that we
Congestion is
clarify.
taken into consideration?
Well, the levels of service,
Yeah. Well, and we've had this discussion, as we've seen in the comp plan, one of the slides, and I showed us, is that, our plan of action for dealing with the level of service is basically just to keep downgrading it. And in a sense, instead of just using the level of service C, D, and E, we've moved to where we're accepting a level of service E with a 30%, so again, anything above E usually goes to F in my book. But, so our method of doing this has always been to just downgrade our level of service. So I guess what again, trying to come back to an answer is, for when I make decisions or look at things, is that when you come back, or as the city staff comes back with a recommendation that, any change, any item that comes before us that requires a change to the current level of service, I'm always questioning as to how that capacity was done. Thank you for the answer. So that when we see that statement that there is sufficient capacity on the road, we confuse that as residents with congestion. We confuse that we're on these roads every single day, whether it's an intersection that we can't get through, or, just a time and delay issue. So it's difficult for us to see constantly when something new comes to us that there's still sufficient capacity when we see that. So I'm trying to separate those two. I don't know if you can help us with that or not.
There's one aspect of the congestion of an intersection that you should understand. The intersection is evaluated as an entire system, okay? So if the entire intersection is, the overall level of service for the intersection is level of service E, then it gets a thumbs up. Now, within the intersection, as you know, you've got individual lane groups. You've got the eastbound left, eastbound through, eastbound right. Those individual lane groups are permitted to be level of service F, and the developer would not necessarily have a responsibility. But what I would do whenever I'm evaluating that is take a look at the volume to capacity ratio, the VC for each one of those movements, because we don't allow those to go over 1.0, which means, remember, for VC, once the volume and capacity exceeds 1, it means it's oversaturated. So we at least evaluate it from that standpoint, but the intersection itself is looked upon as an entire system. So for side streets or minor movements, let's say on 434 and Alexandria, right out here. Alafaya may flow pretty well. It may be level of service B, C, or D. Alexandria might have to wait longer than usual because FDOT wants to favor the state road. So Alexandria itself may be level of service E or F, but overall that intersection might be level of service D. And because the overall intersection level of service is D, then it's deemed that it's operating acceptably.
Understood. The calculations that you use for ITE, it's going to give you a standard value of what the expectation is for parking or trips, day or night, peak times, for a general classification of a shop, a retail center, a restaurant, that kind of stuff. The thing that it doesn't usually factor in is the brand. I know that's an odd word, but there are brands that will draw a heavier amount of traffic than can be expected.
So we're on the 10th edition of the ITE Trip Generation Manual, and with each edition, we're finding that they're refining the land use codes more and more. In the 10th edition, there are new land use codes for fast casual restaurants as opposed to fast food or high turnover sit down. So that encompasses the things like the Chipotles. It encompasses Tzatziki's would fall under that. Cafe Rio, is that? So those are all considered fast casual, which have different trip characteristics than a McDonald's or a Chili's. So they've broken that out. We have land use codes for a, what do they call them? But basically that includes super Targets and super Walmarts now. There's a land use code for large box discount club warehouses, Sam's, Costco, BJ's. So as each iteration of the ITE Trip Generation comes out, we're seeing more refined uses. Marijuana dispensaries was a new one in this edition as well, instead of grouping them with pharmacies.
Thank you, because that was going to be my next question, how current is the IT?
I have a question.
That was going to be my question, how current is the IT? Are we using the current version, or are we?
Yes.
Okay.
During the methodology phase, we require that the 10th edition came out a year and a half ago, and there may be some consultants that are still using the 9th edition. During the methodology, we will make sure that they're using the 10th edition.
I have a question about
Ms. Fallon?
about what you were saying about the level with like the development versus, I don't remember what you said about fast food versus casual dining and all that. But how do we or the city keep the developer responsible to make sure that all of a sudden it doesn't go from like a Chili's and they can't get the retail there or that type of tenant to build there, so then it changes to a McDonald's?
Okay.
How do we, where's that point of where that level of, I don't know if it's control from the city's
I
point
would have
to
to
make
turn
sure,
to the city. I don't know how that bookkeeping is done.
because that's where changes happen in development.
Cities
and it
do
gets
it different
complicated.
ways. during the developer's agreement, they can also submit what's called an equivalency matrix or an exchange matrix that says if they're permitted to exchange, let's say, retail for multifamily or vice versa, if for every 1,000 square feet of retail, they're allowed to exchange that for 4.3 multifamily units. Because there's, in the ITE, it says, okay, 1,000 square feet of retail generates the same amount of trips as those 4.3 multifamily units. Or if they decide to reduce the number of multifamily units by 100, then they'll be allowed to develop 22,000 square feet of office.
And does the city track that type of development when that's happening? Or is it because now the property and it's all been approved and?
So that
I don't know if my question
depends,
makes
because
sense.
a lot of our development comes from shopping centers, right?
Right.
So they would be analyzed as shopping centers, right, for the traffic impact. So the mix of individual uses would already be, in the calculation. I'm trying to remember one case that happened in the city,
Right.
that we had. So, for instance, Chick-fil-A came from a redevelopment of the whole site. It went through a new traffic study because it was a new development, a redevelopment. I'm trying to think about one that was a less intense use.
Yeah, usually when we have new site plans, the traffic analysis is a component of that. At the very baseline, when someone is converting one site from one use to another use, they have to submit a site plan.
Right.
As part of that review, we ask them to submit their trips, and then we send those trips over to COC1 to see if those trips make sense and if those trips trigger anything on that TCMS Excel spreadsheet that we keep track of, and if it does, then we require a traffic analysis.
So it's a whole package. The traffic study comes with the site plans, and so if there's any alteration in that site plan, then we should be able to catch what.
It just seems like it's a potential, there seems to be some sort of gray area with that as projects develop over the time where things could fall through the cracks. It just seems like, to me, it just seems like something like that could happen if if all of a sudden, like, the land's been sold, and the buildings are being built, but they can't get the leases, the developer wants to get the leases, and then it just seems like it could be, and that's not that's more of a question for the city than so I'm not trying to put that on your shoulders.
I mean, this is just speculation on my part, but I would imagine that once you have the site plan approved, once you have the traffic study approved, they're in sync with each other. And there's a developers agreement that goes along with that. When the applicant pulls a permit, then it's checked against all of those to make sure that nothing has changed. So that whenever they do break ground, whenever they do build all of that.
Because it's used in square footage.
Right.
So if the square footage changed too, when the
It may
site plan has
typically-
changed, that would be checked again.
It may typically come out in the wash to be the same. It's just, I don't know, it's a fair question, I think, that.
The way our applications are forms that the city has now for comp plans, zoning changes, annexations, special exception use orders, SDOs, there's a checklist on the left-hand side of each of those applications, and the TIA is one that we always ask, whether it's at the comp plan stage, where they're asking for new entitlements, or at the site plan stage, where they're asking to move, they have the entitlements, but they're ready to move forward with development. For tenancy changes, when those building permits come in, one of the requirements in that submittal is that they submit a copy of the site plan. We've received, and Jay can tell you, we received several applications for tenant changes or new construction where they didn't submit the accompanying site plan, and that's one of the comments that we put in Avalon is, please submit the site plan that was approved for this building. And then we compared if there's any changes, whether the configuration of the building changed, their square footage changed, or all of a sudden they add an outside patio. Those things we do look at at the building permitting stage.
One of the things that you said a little while ago was that when you're looking at the capacity for an intersection, the VC, one might be 0.75. If it's saturated, it's 1.0, I think.
1.0 or higher, yeah.
Okay. And you said something about you wouldn't let it go over 1.0. How do you prevent that? How do you stop it?
Sure. In the traffic study, usually found in the appendix are the intersection analyses, the output reports that they produce for each intersection that we agree to in the methodology that they need to analyze, and whether or not they analyze AM or PM. So all of that is in the appendix. I take a look at their inputs, make sure that all the inputs are reasonable, make sure that the numbers that they're using for the volumes match up with the volumes that were counted on that day. And then in their analysis, it has a number of different measures of effectiveness. One of those is the VC ratio for each individual movement. And I can take a look and see which ones may be over 1. And if they are, then that's a comment that I put down. And I say, okay, well, you need to use the existing timing and phasings, which you have, and we need to find improvements that would resolve the VC so it's not over 1.0.
And what types of things would do that?
To reduce the VC, the easiest, the most economical for the applicant would be retiming the signals, so that so if there's a movement whose VC is, let's say, 0.87, and there's another one whose VC is over 1.0, it would be taking away a second or two of green time from that 0.87, giving it to the other one, and trying to balance that out. Okay, so that it would be, we just lump that together and say it's optimizing the signal timing and phasing. The second option would be if the movement that is in question is a turning movement, then it would be the addition of a turn lane. If it's in a shared lane, if it's a shared through right lane, it would be the construction of an exclusive right turn lane. If it's in an existing left turn lane, then and we couldn't give it more green time, then we take a look at the volume. Does it make sense to have dual left turn lanes? If it's in a through lane, then that's when the higher cost for possible widening might come up. So that's why you might have roads that are, maybe it's a 2-lane road, or maybe it's 2 lanes in each direction, but when you get to the intersection, you'll have dual lefts, 2 throughs, and a right turn, so all of the turns are maximized. So that's, if you're familiar with University and Dean Road is that way. The north and south approaches, the geometrics are basically maxed out in order to accommodate the demand.
If we've got a project coming before us that, for a parcel that had been approved for something else, and for whatever reason it never got built.
Mm-hmm.
Now the owner or the new owner wants to build something different.
Right.
And sometimes we've seen in our staff reports that the traffic engineer says that this, it results in fewer trips, and so it's a net decrease in the number of trips. How does that equate to the number of cars, additional cars that are going to be on the road? Because when we're looking at capacity, because we're sitting there, like tonight I sat at the Mitchell Hammock for a while to get here. If we've already approved one project and said
Yes.
years ago that it would be okay, but now we're going to do something different, how do we say now that the additional cars are not going to affect?
Kakwad, if I could, to answer that question, have you explained how you track the TCMS in terms of when trips get approved,
Sure.
how they're bookkeeped, and when they progress into becoming background trips?
We have a spreadsheet where I'm one of the keepers. The city, of course, has a copy where we maintain all of the committed or vested trips from approved developments. Once a development goes through the process and becomes approved, then their trips are counted against the remaining capacity on the road. Okay, whether or not that project is built, I misspoke. Until that project is built, and generating traffic itself. But up to that point, before it's built, their trips are already counted as being on the road.
Counted as far as the level of service?
Yes,
Okay.
as far as level of service and the demand. So in a traffic study, when the applicant is providing the future intersection analysis, you've got background traffic, which is traffic that's already on the road, that's grown by some kind of either historic growth rate or model growth rate, plus vested trips or committed trips. Those are the trips from the projects that have been approved that have not been constructed yet, plus their project traffic. All of that equals the total traffic for the specific turning movement.
But I can think of two situations that could happen. So if you have, for instance, a project that is, because it's not only the number of cars that we are adding to the infrastructure, to our roads, but how those cars will be dispersed. So if you're also increasing capacity or increasing connectivity so that those cars can be dispersed in a different pattern, that will help, show less trips on specific roads. Also, if you have mixed-use development, you have internal trips, if it's a large development with mixed use, and that's why we have been supporting mixed use, right? And I think, and on the planning side, to talk about what is the stage of the city. I mean, we are becoming more urban. We are starting to have a more urban pattern. So we are moving from suburban pattern to more urban pattern. In a suburban pattern, the uses are separated, right? And because of that, you have more trips because you need to travel to be able to shop, to work and to go back home. Mixed use, the beauty of mixed use is that you can do a lot of those things internally to a development, but you can also you can walk, you can bike, to places, and that happens in Novidona Park, right? If you live in Novidona Park, you can go to an event in the city, and you can go to shop, and you can go to public walking, right? It's possible. In a suburban type of development, that is not possible. The other feature of suburban is the lack of connectivity. So, and our half of our map shows that, a lot of cul-de-sacs. So, and that is something for us to think that if we are keeping on doing the same things that we have been doing, we should expect the same results, right? So if you have a lot of development that does not connect to each other, we will have the same old streets being overburdened with traffic, because that's the only way to travel from one place to the other. And that's why the grid system for planning is the best one, is the most efficient one, because you have multiple ways to go from point A to B. Well, we are not messing with the suburban area of the city, right? That is consolidated. We are not trying to change that. But what we are trying to do is that the new development that we are trying to bring should have that pattern that is more pedestrian friendly, that promotes connectivity, and as much as we can, also improve capacity, increases capacity.
Mr. Lopez.
I have a general question that's pretty open to anybody that's an engineer. So once we've done this analysis, we have the IT, we got a good study supposedly. Has anybody ever gone back and actually physically done a count? Or are we strictly dependent on that information? Do we know what the accuracy level is, what the percentage of errors are in that program? Because there's got to be some errors. It's a general question. And from looking at everybody's faces, everybody's like, nope. So we really don't know, in fact, if this program, the IT and all this analysis, actually works, right? Is it a fair assumption?
I'm sorry, whether ITE works?
Well, in other words, you've used all these analytics, right, to best judge what the potential trips are going to be for this development or that development. Has anyone, at the end of the day, after the development's done, 6 months afterwards or a year, gone back and actually physically done the counts for that development?
That's not usually something that is done.
So we don't really know then the analytics that is being applied to process these numbers is accurate.
For a specific development, no. But all the trips that are generated, that are calculated from ITE are all done by surveys. Now, those surveys are nationwide. They're not specific to Oviedo, not specific to
So you're just using generalistic numbers. So we really don't know what really is affecting Oviedo and not affecting Oviedo, correct?
Correct.
So, and I think that's the,
Mr. Darrell, I mean, I disagree to a certain extent.
Okay.
I mean,
We're good.
Every year, you know, we have,
Oh, yeah.
every segment of Oviedo is measured. So annually, we will see whether there's an increase or decrease in a certain segment, and those usually can be attributed to, you know, regional or outside of us, you know. I mean, we can determine what's coming from outside the city boundary. But to answer your question, no one's ever going to go back.
Well, that's what I'm
No
saying.
one went to your subdivision and measured to see
Well, that's
whether
what-
or not you had 7 kids and had 7 cars added
well,
versus.
that's
the
what
2
I'm
that
saying,
were not.
because,
So,
I mean, you know, those of us that live in Oviedo, right?
Yeah,
We're
no,
included.
no, understood, yeah.
You know,
No, and I'm not being argumentative.
Oh, no, I know you're not. I know you're not. To me, whatever number is being applied, or whatever algorithm is being applied, or analysis, or whatever you want to call it, is not working, because the streets in Oviedo are horrendous. Now, I agree with Teresa there, is that, you know, a lot of the other cities have throughput streets and that alleviate some of the flow, and we don't have that. I agree. But to me, there's a disconnect of what is actually happening and what information we're actually retrieving. And I think that's where the disconnect is. And I think that's the frustration that a lot of us up here are sitting at, because people that know that we're on this board are constantly beating us up. You know, what are you going to do about this traffic? You know, and I know you've got the analytics for the camera, the traffic lights. You know, sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not. And I get that, because it's just based on analytics, right? But the people are complaining. You don't get to hear the complaints as much as we do. I know you get to hear some of them.
Oh, we do, yeah.
But so what I'm trying to come, and what we're trying to do is come up to a conclusion. What do we need to do to better situate the city to alleviate these issues? You know, do we go out and research some other programs? I don't know. I don't know what's out there. You know, I mean, that's my statement. I mean, we can sit here all night long and discuss, you know, traffic counts and ITs. At the end of the day, whatever we're using currently isn't working, in my personal opinion.
Can I just ask a question? Is there a way to add some kind of factor of potential error?
Mr. Cashin, can you
The
speak into the
number.
mic, please?
Is there a way that some sort of factor of potential error can be added to the numbers up front, so that if we think there's 1,000 cars, the calculation will think there's, you know, 1,050 cars, so that if there is 1,050 cars, all's good?
I understand what you're saying. We use the tools that we have on hand, and we use the rates that we have. If we start venturing into things like that, then the city may run into problems in the future with developers that could bring about lawsuits saying that what you're doing is adversely, unfairly impacting what my traffic study is showing, because my traffic study is including all of these industry standard rates that are accepted everywhere else.
If I could, to Mr. Lopez's question, I think everybody in this room can agree that the ITE is, basically our guidance is to use the best available professionally acceptable methodology. So we look to our experts, our engineers, traffic engineers. So we're using the nationwide professionally accepted standard across the board for every project, for every application that comes in. What I also like to point out is that I have been involved in instances where, not as it relates, well, yeah, as it relates to traffic counts as well, but if the developer were willing to absorb that cost, the city absorbs, or the jurisdiction absorbs that cost of actually collecting the counts, we'd still have to vet those counts against existing literature like the ITE, the Highway Capacity Manual, all those other nationwide accepted standards. In instances for going back and counting, I've experienced that in Orange County as it relates to impact fees for transportation. We have a similar thing here at the city that I don't think, since I've been here, that anyone's utilized. But in Orange County, for example, if there's a project going out way at the Econocachi area, the county assesses a certain fee. If they don't agree with that fee, that development enters into an agreement with the county. They move in, they develop that project. 6 months later, after it's been CO'd, 6 months after CO, we do a traffic count. And if our counts show something that's different, they agree to abide by that new fee. And that new fee is sometimes higher. So I've seen it done for purposes of impact fees. I've not seen it done for purposes of counting trips, because typically everybody accepts the methodology.
The only situation that I can think of readily where counts are done for development is for the larger DRIs, where you have monitoring and modeling. So once phase one of a development is done, then as part of the methodology to conduct your phase two development, the applicant or developer would need to conduct counts on their site to show that what they said was going to occur in phase one did occur and did not exceed this number before he can proceed with the study for his subsequent phases.
Yeah, and that's typically because, some of you may know, because DRIs take longer to build. It happens with the M&M process. So,
Are there times when you've told an applicant that their project just won't fit because of the traffic counts? Do you ever say no?
Yes.
How often?
As opposed to working with them to find ways to resolve. I would say that 60% of the time I will have, probably no, more than that, 75% of the time I will have issues that are documented and provided to them that they need to correct. Okay. I would say that we can sit down with city staff and work through those to identify what their obligations are to mitigate their impacts. There's probably 5 to 10% of the time when my recommendation to the city or to the county during my review is to deny because we reach an impasse and neither side can agree on what it is that the other needs to do in order to mitigate those impacts. But most of the time, if we're sitting down in a forum like this, we can talk through it and come to an agreement that the city is willing to accept or the applicant is willing to accept to mitigate those impacts. My job is to identify from a technical standpoint what their impacts are and how they need to mitigate. And then usually there is discussion after that between the city and the applicant to say, okay, well, this is what my traffic consultant says you need to do, so how do we resolve that?
Do those not ever get to us?
No.
site development orders don't come to you guys?
Where the traffic engineer has said no.
We never see one.
If we say no, then I don't know why
It wouldn't, if it doesn't pass
Yeah.
us,
Isn't
it
that,
typically.
what you just discussed is pre-entitlement.
That's correct.
Okay. Post-entitlement, if the zoning's there and everything is technically correct for the development to be approved, if the traffic is a bust, that's too bad.
Right.
That's the.
So
It
then
never
would
gets to us
never get
anyway.
to us.
Excuse me?
So then it would never get to
It
this
never
board.
gets,
No.
it may be horrible, it may have been miscalculated, the ITE may have been wrong, but it was entitled and it got approved. It was entitled to be approved.
But in the discussion of even entitlement and development programs, we have reduced, for instance, intensity and density, even below what was allowed to, so that the traffic would work. So that is part of the negotiation. Since I'm here, I haven't seen a case that the city has denied any project based on, no, not even for entitlement. To be entitled, I haven't seen that. But
So I have a question.
Mr.
We're
Lopez.
talking about, she brought up earlier,
Yes, I'm here.
about, if someone moves out, moves in, how do we, and this is, it never come to us, so I don't know. So we got the shopping center, the old Albertson Shopping Center, now they're putting in a pad up front. How did we address the traffic issue for that pad? Because now we're adding more stores, makes more trips.
So they had to go through a traffic study. They also reduced their square footage of the main Albertsons.
Well, yeah, but I thought they divided it up a little bit.
Well, they removed 30 feet of their front.
Okay.
So they had in net increase in square footage, I think 9,000.
Yeah, just under 10,000.
So the rest they were
That's
vested because it was already there. So the traffic study, but we had a traffic study for
Okay.
that. We had impact fees. We have to do all those things.
How many new trips? New trips,
Oh, I don't remember.
not trips that are,
But new trips because of that new pad,
well, no,
or because of the new project in general?
the new project in general.
Sure.
Because it's already counted some number of trips.
Yeah.
Because it's previously developed, right?
That's correct.
So it may, in theory, have less trips, it may have the same trips. but if
Right,
it's
so,
successful,
so,
it may
so
have
the only,
more trips.
right, so the only thing we can do is compare it by number of square feet. So if you had 100,000 square feet before, it's going to generate X number of trips, and that shopping center then closed down, for all intents and purposes. A new one comes in, and they say, oh, well, we only need 90,000 square feet. Then an analysis is done just as a formality to show that, well, the amount of trips that it's going to generate now is going to be less than the 100,000. But if there's a mix of trips that, or mix of land uses, let's say before it was all shopping center, and now it's going to be shopping center with fast casual restaurant with a high turnover sit-down restaurant, but it still equals 90,000. Well, it's going to be a different trip generation rates, and so we need to figure that out. It can still generate more trips than what the 100,000 did, because restaurants generate more trips than general retail. So we would take a look at that and make sure that the new trips above and beyond what's invested isn't going to adversely affect the roadways.
Yeah, so we look at the delta.
So my next question is, when we look at some of our roadways that are E or F now, and we have more projects come in, new ones. We had vacant land, and now we've got some new project that wants to come in. Those of us that are sitting in the traffic who think that we already have a lot of congestion, but yet the numbers work for the capacity, how do we get the public to understand that that's going to work? Because I think that's the biggest disconnect that the board has seen.
I do think that there's an education component and there's a discussion component, but it is an uphill battle, because if your standards say that the capacity of this road should be level service E plus 30%, what that means is the current policies say that this segment of road is allowed to be this much over congestion. So, and if I am evaluating a traffic study, and if the traffic study shows that the volume of traffic on that segment of road for future conditions with the growth, with vested trips, with project trips, falls below that E plus 30 threshold, then it still has capacity based on policy.
So that's the difference based on policy.
Mhm. That's that perception versus policy rub.
And that level of service, E plus 30%, is set by council?
Yeah, policy decisions are made by council.
Okay.
But according to Mr.
Which-
Root, we can
It's
we can
covered in the
also make
comp plan.
suggestions.
We have input into it because we're part of the process of developing any amendments to the comp plan.
Yes.
Can I
Mr. Wright.
evolve this conversation? Because I'm very comfortable with how we got from project that came in, how you reviewed it and it got to us.
Right.
So, and understanding that, through our conversations that we've had on the board, but we have limitations as to what we can ask any developer or any person who's wanting to bring a new project into the city of what we can put on them as far as traffic impact, improvements, that are associated with there. So there's a couple questions here. As you mentioned that, when you look at an intersection, development comes in, you review it, it meets our capacity, it follows our level of standards that we have. We approve it, maybe with or with no minor, improvements to get into the development on a turn lane or not. At the end of the day, does that mean that the last person in who trips the threshold is responsible then for the improvements to the intersection, or he doesn't have a project? Or
Yes.
it kind of goes back to, what I was going to ask about, you already brought it up, is that do we have as a city anything in our policies that really, there is an impact, as any development that comes in is having an impact by adding capacity, or especially if we go plus. If there's any development that goes plus that adds a positive net trips, that they basically pay towards the, I'm not asking them to pay the intersection, but, something that allows us to be proactive, because Teresa echoed it very clearly, is that, we have a policy, as long as I've been in the city, that we just keep doing the same thing. We have no connectivities between our neighborhoods. We got rid of our grid system back in the 90s. We threw that policy out. So everything was forced to one street that we own, and that's basically Mitchell Hammock on Lockwood. So everything else is controlled outside of the major intersections are controlled for the most part signalization-wise. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but at the end of the day, what I'm trying to turn is, again, our frustration is how we're not going to solve every single problem, the project that comes to us. We can't fix that. That's up to the experts and staff. But we are part of the comp plan. We are part of the process of developing a transportation element. And what I would like to see our board do is to be more proactive in developing how can we, we've had traffic plans back in the 90s that basically said, these are the improvements that you can or should not make. How do we get from that point to the future point?
Like, I heard a number of questions.
I know.
I'll try to
I thought there was
go
two,
in
but I
order.
probably threw three.
Okay.
There's 4 or 5 in there.
So when a roadway facility, whether it's a roadway segment or intersection, reaches near capacity, let's say 99% of the capacity, now you've got a 7-Eleven that wants to come in. They exceed the capacity. Now they become responsible for fixing that problem, okay? Now, if normal growth in traffic showed that facility is over capacity, if you remember Anach's presentation, it becomes backlogged or deficient, because current legislation then says, oh, well, this project doesn't have to fix backlogged or deficient facilities. So they can put their impacts there and not have to deal with it. And that legislation was, I think, from 2011 or 2012. So there was a point where the pendulum was swung one way, where it allowed local jurisdictions a lot of influence in saying, you're going to be responsible for this, this, and this. When the recession hit, I'm going into politics a little bit, but when the recession hit, then the pendulum swung the other way, and in order to permit growth to come, state legislatures said, okay, well, let's not make them responsible if the road is already bad. And so that's what we have right now. But you are absolutely right. You have the influence, you have the power to start changing the policies as it pertains to the city. And with the update to the comp plan within the next year, that gives you a lot of I think, accessibility to make the changes that
why we're here
everyone here
tonight.
believes is needed within the city.
Bobby, I know you haven't really said a lot tonight for us, but
He's hiding.
the question I would have is, again, being proactive. You know, we fund our transportation or multimodal, any type of modal use project that we have through our capital improvements project. We have a list, whether it's, I think, 5 years out, you know, we have projects that are set aside that are city projects, not necessarily the county or the state projects, but are we maxed out? Do we have any float in the budget? Do you have the ability to add things on a more priority basis?
Actually, budget is my biggest limiting factor. We have 3 sources of revenue right now that we use for roadways in the city. We have transportation impact fees, which, by the way, we have virtually none right now left, just enough for a project going on Lockwood right now. We have it's a local option gas tax, which we use for operational problems or maintenance, like road surfacing. And we have our current third-generation sales tax with the county. And we're currently using that for our regional stormwater pond and our future Geneva Drive realignment, which is going to pretty much take everything we have. Priorities right now, the way we address them is where's the hot spots operationally for access. For instance, over here at Mitchell Hammock and 434, we're adding a second left-hand turn lane that's coming in. Over on Lockwood northbound and Mitchell Hammock, we're adding a second left-hand turn lane. That's kind of where we are right now priority-wise, trying to hit hot spots for operational access. Because really, people talk about widening Mitchell Hammock. Well, that's a $50 million project. How are we going to finance that? To me, I don't know how that happens. So I'm looking at how can I work within my current parameters. And to me, I try and make what we have work better. And along with Mr. Clark's in sync, which I have to say has helped flow along Mitchell Hammock. I know people don't like to say that, but actually it does work for what it's supposed to do. Access and safety improvements are really what my current priority is from a public works standpoint. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it did. Yeah, because the question I kind of follow up with is that during our discussions with staff, when we're in our sessions, we always talk about the word multimodal. That those are the options that we're, again, mixed use, keeping the trips internal is great. But for me personally, multimodal means I either walk or I ride my bike, because we don't really have any transit, options or really any other options. So, our policies, our comp plan really. As I always mention something, and Knock always tells me that there's a policy in there that we have, but for sidewalks, and I'll give you an example. One I'm thinking of is that the county is going to be widening 419 Phase 3 from downtown to Lockwood for the most part, whenever roughly that segment. I look at that as an opportunity for the city. County's going to go in, they're going to put in their urban lanes, they're going to put in a bike lane along the 4-foot, whatever, 4-6 bike lane along the side of the roads, which is great for the people that are, the bike riders that want to go long distance or the commuter type bikes. But it's not really necessarily segmented for a family that's going to ride their 3-year-olds down the side of 419. So they're going to put in a standard 5-foot sidewalk, Right. Question is, it's going to be built brand new. Why don't we offset and see if we can get them to widen it to 8 or 10 and make a true bike lane connection that would connect the east side of town to our downtown core. That to me, because right now most people don't want to ride on those little 4-foot sidewalks along 419 from my subdivision, Riverside, or Sanctuary or anything like that. And that's how we connect it. We give them a route, another multimodal type route. But we got a project that's about to be built. The question is, how would we fund that? How would we add the extra cost to pay for the extra design or the extra construction of concrete, or whether or not it can be built sufficiently that would allow us to, because we can't do that. We can't go back in after the fact later and build an 8-foot bike lane,
Right.
So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about, is what can the city control?
Well, I think there's a...
Right now, you're basically saying there's no money.
No, well,
Yeah.
it's funny, people say there's ever no money, but, if it's important enough, we usually find ways to do it. I would say that your first challenge with a project like that is not so much money, it's will it fit
Oh, no,
within
absolutely.
within the available right-of-way.
Yeah.
Especially when you're adding, you want an 8-foot or a 10-foot, what I'd call a trail sidewalk.
Yeah.
It really kind of taxes the limits of the right-of-way, especially when you're talking, typically a 5-lane section, or the 4-lane section with a wider median to allow access. But once you determine that it'll fit either one side or the other, or both, if it works, then you can pretty much, actually, I find you can work with the county to try and get what you want. It's just they're going to make you pay for it.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't think that it's, the opportunity is there from my perspective. It's just working with the county to make it,
I'm looking at things that we can control, and some of the recent projects that were brought up. One of the frustrating parts for me is that the redevelopment is great versus an empty, dilapidated, center or building. The problem is they had limited access before, right in, right out. We have a lot of right in, right out conditions, which means that people now right out, they go down to the next signal, they U-turn around, and then, it adds a lot of movements that aren't really counted for in the IT anywhere. We're forcing people to find an ulterior route to get back in the direction they wanted to go. And it's happening a lot in our redevelopment in our Mitchell-Hammock corridor.
Oh, yeah.
And while we can't, and I asked this question last time when we've had developments, is that we can't mandate that they build the frontage part of the road first in part of phase one, where it doesn't make any sense for them, because there's no marketable or dollar value for them to go out and put that in there first when, their money's going to be in the first phase of their development. But so it comes back to the city is how we make improvements. How do we connect a development or connect a commercial area, or how we build a frontage, or in this case, I'm the multimodal part now, that I'm not giving up on it, but how can we look at opportunities that we can connect so that we can lessen traffic? Because those are the only things I see us controlling at this point. I mean, long term, this board, council, staff can try to evolve our policies so that we don't segregate and separate all of our connections. But so these are the kind of things I was looking at, and really what I was glad you were here tonight, is that what are our limitations? Finances, and then if it is finances, are there any alternative ways? Are there grants out there? Are there any, do we need to call our state, senators and basically start looking for money? Do we need to lobby them? Those are the kind of things that we need to figure out where the money's going to come from. Because
right now, the legislature is trying to take away the ability for the local government to impose taxes upon themselves. So.
And, nobody really wants to, like that word, impose taxes upon ourselves, so.
The only thing I can think of are federal dollars siphoned out through state DOTs, such as the LAP program. I know the city is not a LAP certified community. We have the option of being a project certified, but going in that direction to get that funding increases significantly the cost of the projects. There's opportunities to, based on what I learned from DOT's work session a few weeks back, we could bundle projects. So if we, in Seminole County and Winter Springs, were to identify a trail segment that would benefit the 3 jurisdictions, Seminole County, I believe, is a LAP certified community. They could take the lead, and then we just give our portions, and they would handle everything. But when you accept any federal dollars, there's a lot more scrutiny, a lot more public involvement.
There's the federal way, like federal relocation standards.
Yeah, Title VI, environmental justice, all those things come.
20%?
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not locked in, to federal stuff. I'm just looking at it that
Just an alternative.
we're continuing down a path where we are just accepting of the fact that we're always going to have congestion. We have redevelopment areas that have already either vested or predetermined, capacity. So where do what areas do we control? That's.
So, and that's something that I wanted to respond to you in your previous set of questions. I think one way that we can control, because I think the whole discussion, development or no development, is a wrong route to take.
Absolutely
I agree.
wrong.
Right, so I think that we have the ability to influence development. What type of development? We should attract smart development. We should attract development that brings the connectivity that we want, that improves capacity. So these are the issues that we can raise. And I think that's we have to educate also the residents, that because what we were trying to show today, that everything that we are doing was planned. So we are not bringing, we are a city, we are urban, we are abutting a rural boundary that puts pressure on us because, directs development to the urban area. We are the urban area. And so what is happening was planned. I think what we can do now is be more attentive to what kind of development we are attracting, the design of the development, the connectivity, and these are the issues we are trying to achieve. That specific development that you mentioned, that was the redevelopment of the Albertsons, at least we managed to get the easement for the connection, and that's how planning is also done. Sometimes it takes years to happen, but if we guarantee that we have the easement and the possibility of connection, a connection will happen, right? So we already have Lake Jessup connecting to the south of Mitchell Hammock. Now we have to find a way to connect to the redevelopment. So all the things that we are doing is to improve, the circulation, because again, it's not only the number of cars we are adding, it's how we move those cars around the city. And so that's one thing. The other thing, you were right. I mean, for multimodal, we are still very limited with pedestrian and biking, which is true, but we can do a lot with that. And the painful turning point that we are going through right now is that we are, to have transit, we need to have more density. And density scares people, right? So to get the density that would justify have a transit in the city, well, we are not there yet.
Yeah.
So this is the painful moment that we'll have to adjust to find, smart ways to accept, density where density is acceptable, and so that we reach that point, justify the transit. So we are in the turning point. And just to make a comment to a previous comment that I made, that I hear a lot of complaints, I also hear a lot of good things, a lot of compliments. People happy with the amenities that we are bringing, with the restaurants, with that we have now a center that we can go to and meet people and have the events of the city. So there's also a lot of people that are happy with the development that we are bringing to the city. But it's really trying to find the balance and sharing with the residents what we are trying to achieve, right?
Yes, please don't take my frustration, or if I sound like I'm frustrated,
No,
because
and I think frustration is good.
I've lived here for a long time, and I absolutely love everything that we are doing. I just want to make sure that we find a best way to offset it with the things that we don't control. I think that's the end of the day. On this board, I know that's what I can hopefully project back, is that actually take an active part in the comp plan amendment where we can make some positive changes, if it's just to the transportation or any other element, that's, it shouldn't be just you give us the report, yeah, it sounds great, send it to council, is that we could actually take a very active role. And this is just one segment of it.
No, I think it's great. And I think this work session, that's why we welcomed, the opportunity to have this conversation so that we learn, and we invited some, developers to come here and also listen to the conversation so that they learn, And because frankly, at the end of the day, we want everybody to be successful, right? We also want the development that we are attracting to be successful, to be, if cars and people cannot be moving in the city, that is not going to be a successful venture. So we're trying to find the right balance.
If I could, I want to have Mr. Clark, I want you to, I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain the in-sync system for those who may not be familiar with it and how it moves traffic, and then the floor is yours.
Okay. Before I get into that, I was just going to ask, has the city ever done any public-private partnerships, like a P3 type of project, where I've been in other locations where I've lived, where some agencies, cities, towns were fortunate enough to have a public-private partnership actually contribute to build and provide the things that you're talking about.
I think Oviedo in the Park was a public-private partnership. I don't know if they had that, title in any of the documents, but it was, to my understanding, I did not get the beginning of the Oviedo in the Park, but it was a partnership between the developer and the
I
city.
mean, those sometimes can be very beneficial to the city, where you get somebody coming in that really wants to be part of the community and actually funding a substantial amount of improvement.
Well, the classic example here was realignment of Red Bud Lake Road with the mall.
Yeah.
That was due to family paid for
Most of it.
most of it.
Yeah.
The county did the rest. And that's how Red Bud Lake Road got realigned.
But you're right, we need to find other ways to get revenue and accommodate the transportation issue of the city.
Right.
Howard, and I had made I've met with board and the staff, and I said maybe we ought to come up with some kind of our own little transit system outside of Linksys, And actually, a couple days later, there was a news story that one of the cities is doing that, bypassing Links, so we can do that.
Okay.
Good, in an engineer's hat and a little train running around.
Whatever it takes, we've got to find a way to get the people to go. The problem is, we've got Oviedo on the park, and it's a destination point, but it's hard for your group, from your side of town, from my side of town, to get over there. There's really
We
no.
drive.
Well, yeah.
We drive.
So we're adding that extra congestion to the roads. So if we can find some way to get people from the eastern part of the city all the way to the western part, which everything is, right now, all the destination is on the western side of the city, opposed to the east side. So we've got to come up with some kind of.
Well, can I make a comment? Hopefully, when Phase 2 for the FDOT section widens, actually the construction is supposed to start late next year. That will hopefully add some of that capacity and hopefully take some of the pressure. Yeah, exactly. Take some of the pressure off of Mitchell Hammock. I mean, because people short circuit to go to Mitchell Hammock to get to the 426. Oh, you guys know this. And you add additional. Actually, where we work out on Evans Street, I actually travel. If Jackson Heights isn't getting out, you can actually go from the Evans Street area on 419 all the way to 426 in less time than going down Mitchell Hammock.
About 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's very easy. It works. So hopefully, adding that additional lane, other than Jackson Heights getting out, or any school getting out, that'll help maybe alleviate some of that. So maybe there is a little bit of hope on the horizon, somewhat. It's my hope anyway. Of course, we won't have Phase 3, but we'll have essentially from Avenue B down through Pine Street.
Yeah, I don't, like you said, my personal humble opinion is I don't ever want to see us widen Mitchell Hammock. It's where it needs to stay where it's at. Making it wider, even any segment of it, there's alternatives.
Yeah, you're asking about things you can do. I think one thing that I notice, and I'm not a transportation planner, I'm not even a transportation engineer, I'm a utility engineer, but one thing I notice that would help greatly is options. Something I've always been amazed by is if you think about Oviedo Boulevard, think about, and Teresa mentioned this earlier, cul-de-sacs. Think of the cul-de-sac in Kingsbridge West that stops. We just actually built a sidewalk to it recently for access, for handicap access.
Yeah.
But think about if that roadway came through and connected to Oviedo Boulevard. Think about the amount of people that would not go to Mitchell Hammock, they would come out to Oviedo Boulevard and seek other options to get out. I mean,
Absolutely.
stuff like that, if there's a way to mandate that and force it.
For that reason as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a subdivision,
Yeah.
Live Oak.
I know, but from the engineer, from my perspective, looking at it, options or, I think Oviedo on a park works great in the fact there's so many different options to get in and out of there. That's a good example of what we need more of. And I don't know how the body can recommend and get it into the comp plan, but I think if you can force options, that helps.
That is one of the, reoccurring comments that I've always made is that we do promote connectivity. We do want connectivity with neighborhoods or connectivity between developments, but we don't enforce it. That's where I've always been having the difficulty, is because all of these things are in our objectives and our comp plan and our transportation element, but we don't seem to be able to either make them happen, enforce them, require them. They're just words, basically, and they're dreams for us that just don't seem to be able to push forward. Now, Oviedo on the Park is a perfect example where there was multiple ingress, egress points, where you can get in and out,
And by the way, we are now connecting Wood Street.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an absolutely
defined way.
perfect example of what we should have been doing.
All the time.
But, again,
No, I agree.
it is what it is. So, but like I said, for us to say that we want it, you'll look at me and say, well, it's already part of that. I'm like, okay.
Well, it's like
Now-
Alafaya with Twin Rivers, that should have been connected on the backside. That would have alleviated some of the traffic on Mitchell Hammock as well.
Let's, I want to hear about the signals.
Yep.
We'll digress, you and I.
The other thing to consider too, and remember Lars White would tell me this all the time, part of the problem with some of the subdivisions that are just nothing but a cul-de-sac that dump out on Mitchell Hammock, from a fire and safety perspective, the engines really can't get in there other than one way. And it's a real issue. It's a real safety issue, but
So
people
now-
don't want cut-through traffic either at the same time, and yet
Now, our code, in Article 8, we require at least 2 access points for multifamily, for new, but this is the new code, right? So in the past,
Yeah.
we
This is
would allow.
essentially-
Because I live in a cul-de-sac, and I know how, I've seen the fire, it's almost impossible to turn around.
Like Anat had mentioned early on, with any signal system here, nobody has a system that can solve saturated conditions. And if they tell you that they do, they're lying to you. Can't solve that. The system we have out there with the cameras and things, what we do different, it's a digital signal system. It's digital. It goes from, let's say, remember your old TV set, you're on channel 7, you want to go to channel 11, you had to sequentially go 7, 8, 9, 10 to get to 11. The system that's out there is digital. So if, let's say you wanted to watch UCF football, and they're on channel 1023, and you're on channel 7, you pick up your remote and you bash in 1023, and you immediately go there. That's what that system does. Now, what's that mean to you? Pay attention, because you have the opportunity with that system out there. It's measuring. We're the only ones that measure the real-time queue that's out there. We don't have maximum green times. We have an allocation of green time based upon what's physically out there
How are you measuring it?
with the
What,
camera.
I mean, is it an infrared camera, is it a laser camera, or just a camera, or
It's
just?
both. I have optical and thermal cameras out there.
And so
I-
you've got an algorithm built into the software that counts the cars?
Yes, yes. So we allocate the green time based upon what we see out there in real-time queue. We also know how long you've been waiting there. So depending upon the time of day, what the demands are, it'll give a priority. It may be one approach gets the priority left, and then, right after that, the next cycle, the next period length here could be completely opposite based upon what it's measuring. So it knows how long you've been there and what the actual queue is and how much green time allocation. Like what Bobby had said to me when I came in, he actually had a chance to observe out there. I'm out on Mitchell Hammock all the time, so I've got my engineers, when my neighbors complain about something, or if Dominic or Lars or somebody complains, I'm out there and I'll say, okay, we need to tweak this, it's not doing things.
So you have a semi-AI system built?
Yeah, I'm on these guys, because this is a profoundly different type of signal control. I worked 20 years for Federal Highway Administration. I used to handle all their research and development. So this is profoundly different, but it does things different. We're not constrained like the old analog system where you had to sequentially go through a different phase every time. Our system allows you what it's measuring out there. If there's nobody coming, it can gap out, and I can go back and forth, and I can solve multiple phases here without being tied to that TV set going 7, 8, 9, 10 to 11. So it's different. One of the biggest frustrations we have as engineers is this. We've conditioned and you all do it, admit it, you all do it. We conditioned ourselves with a high cycle length, for example. What happens? You just missed the left turn arrow? You don't have to tell me. I know you do it. We get this out, right? So here's what this system can offer you. And I can't solve saturation, but here's what can happen. I put our system in Okeechobee Boulevard, and that's on West Palm Beach.
I was just going to say West Palm Beach. I know the intersection well.
Okay. At Rosemary, where you go in at lunchtime, before we turned it on, I told the county engineer, I said, watch this. Typically, at lunchtime, what happens is eastbound coming in,
Backs up.
they back up.
Yep.
Okay? The day we turned it on, I said, watch this, Gary. There it is. There's a queue of 8 vehicles. Nobody was coming westbound, so it gapped out. We can reserve those movements. The first 4 vehicles were going through. The 5th guy was on his phone. The guy behind him honks on it. He puts it down. He makes it through, and it gaps out on him. So what happens over time, people begin to realize, pay attention to the driving task. That's a safety thing anyway, because you may have an opportunity to be reserved. And I think, Bobby, you said that just happened to you tonight.
At Mitchell Hammock and 434 the other day.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, the newer cars now won't even let you open the phone.
What's that?
On the newer cars, you can't even open up your phone.
Yeah. Good. And
Seriously, you can't.
I mean, but it's a real paradigm shift in traffic in general, and you can probably attest to it as well. It's not analog, but it's got tremendous capabilities of reservice and movements and things. And I'm going to take the amount of green time here. It's almost like I'm giving you more than 60 seconds in a minute. Instead of sitting there idle on a red, I'm going to take that time and I'm going to move somebody. It just depends on when the conditions are.
So,
Clearly, in Mitchell Hammock, with all the development, a lot of ped pushes there. I got to find the time somewhere, right? I'm going to serve those peds. So sometimes people get frustrated, but I guarantee you, once you get through there, you get the green, you should go all the way, you know. But that's basically in a nutshell. There's no silver bullet, but I can tell you, I've done a project down on 535 near Disney. They're happier than a pig in mud now because they're getting in and out of there a lot better.
How many traffic lights do you have here in Oviedo that you're actually controlling?
13?
I think there's 13 on Mitchell Hammock, yeah.
So just Mitchell Hammock.
And I've got University.
I was going to say, 419 in Lockwood is on NSYNC, and then
Now, is that ours or is that a county light?
it's actually a county light, but it's under NSYNC. We pay for it for the maintenance. And the 426 Mitchell Hammock has it, and then the first 2 signals, the one directly east and directly west of 417, actually have the NSYNC as well.
Yeah. And then I have a bunch in Orange County as well, and some other locations in Volusia County. Yeah. But
Jim, the state's going to extend it on 434, correct?
yeah, I'm working with Florida DOT District 5. We have our system down University, LFA, and they're looking at coming from LFA all the way up. What's different about this project, we've also developed something, it's called InConnect. It's the way the future of transportation is going with autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles. It's all coming. And we actually demonstrated down right on campus there, near Frat House Road or Sorority Road. My daughter was there. Anyway, we actually built a device that's an onboard unit that can send a signal to the controller. We do this with transit signal priority. It'll send a control and it'll change the signal state to actually serve that particular vehicle. So we do it with preemption and other things. That's the future. Right or wrong, this is where we're all going. Autonomous vehicles and things. This stuff is happening faster than what people realize. And it's all good for the safety aspects. I was telling him, my wife has a 2018 CRV with adaptive cruise control. Has anybody driven adaptive cruise control?
My car has it.
It's amazing. We went up to see my daughter at Jacksonville. I never
Scary is
touched.
what it is.
Well, it is at first.
Oh, without a doubt.
I never touched the brakes.
Nope.
You know, it'll adapt, and I come down the ramp, I'm behind you, and you're slowing down, it automatically stops. I just touch the accelerator. These are all safety things. So if some idiot pulls out in front of you, not you, that pulls out in front, the automatically, it's all about safety.
It even tells you if you're too close to someone, if they're turning and you're not slowing down, it will be bad.
Exactly. And the reason I bring this up, the system we built out there, VDOT, we have 13 corridors up there. We had crash reductions anywhere from 17 to 30% on crash reductions with this system. And it's not just rear-end collisions, it's even angle collisions. So this kind of technology can go a long way on not only moving people, but a lot safer as well. So, but no silver bullet, but when people will start putting this down and pay attention to driving tasks, I think we'll be able to move a lot better. But
Question, but I know you wanted to.
No, you covered it.
Okay. What's our coverage in the city then? Are we 100% covered? Are we for 30, 20?
Mitchell Hammock corridor. Mitchell Hammock corridor
Okay,
only,
only.
right now.
Is there future plans for expansion at this point, or are we?
Mr. Lopez got money, we can do anything.
But I mean, again, is it?
I mean, I understand it. I mean,
yeah,
Is it, at this point in time, is it a line item in a capital improvements project for future funding at this point, or is it just?
No,
talk?
sir, it does not exist in current projection.
How long has it been installed?
since 2016.
2 years? 3 years?
2016, December 2016.
I didn't realize it was that long. I knew it was 2 years.
Not quite 2.5, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you received less complaints in general from?
Actually, yes. When it first went in, when they were first, you have to make it work, you know. But there was a lot initially, and but as they tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it, now I haven't seen a signal complaint in probably a couple months.
I haven't called.
It didn't make it to me, and I'm the one who gets them when they come in. So
Yeah, I'll send you my son's phone number.
So this goes back, so thank you for the information. About our, like intersections, and this was something Juan had said, when intersections fail. So my personal, path to work in transportation in the city of Oviedo is, one thing I've noticed about our intersections is this is the only city that I've ever seen that people feel like they have a free left, when on a green. When someone has the right to turn right or go straight, if they have a window, they can turn in conjunction with another right turn lane. It happens at Lockwood in the on our dual right going westbound on Mitchell Hammock. It happens here at Clara Lee.
But is it illegal?
Clara Lee's a little different because it's the only intersection I've ever seen where we have a left and through and a right and not a on both sides. So
That's
we have
split phase.
dedicated rights and a left and a through. So the question I have is that since these are kind of signals that we can control, there's a safety issue. Yesterday I saw a runner, almost the car stopped 6 inches from him when he was in the middle of the intersection here, going from this side to the park, because someone still took the left, even though they had the pedestrian walk sign, because they wanted to shoot through and they had a gap. So there are certain things, and it goes back to the traffic. I know you're looking at our development side, but from city staff, from your system, and from our traffic engineer consultant, there are things that I think that we need to do to fix our signalization. I'm not a traffic engineer. I work as an engineer, but I'm not a traffic engineer. But for instance, I'll give you some examples because this is my route every single day for the last 20 years. We have on 419 eastbound on Lockwood North eastbound to 419. We have a free green when the westbound 419 is turning left. We have a green arrow. We don't have that at Lockwood, eastbound or westbound on the Mitchell Hammock. Basically, you have the stop arrow no turn right on red, but we don't necessarily have the free movement. So the question I have is, why can't we do certain little things I think would improve is that, don't give give them a solid red on Lockwood northbound turning left onto Mitchell Hammock, so that people don't try to turn at the same time, so you have a left and a right merging in, a double lane. It happens every day. Clara Lee is an example, pointing the wrong direction, but
And I'm guilty on that, by the way.
yeah, I know you are. I saw you. We were right face to face to each other next door.
That's why I'm saying I'm guilty.
But Clara Lee is another example, the leaving from the campus here, this side of town, going across. There is a lot of delay in making a left turn on the Mitchell Hammock because we have the people coming through from downtown on the park, and then people, never don't have their signals on, so you don't know if they're making a left. Even if we just said, okay, let the movement come through from Oviedo on the park, southbound, stop them, and then let free movement of rights and lefts for people leaving Clara Lee. The problem with Clara Lee is that there's still a lot of cut-through traffic. People still avoid 434, and at peak times, it's a constant flow of cars coming through Alexandria, up Clara Lee to make the right onto Mitchell Hammock. I mean, I understand, we have the signal now at Alexandria and 434, that's helped a lot. I think there's even a signal planned here at Alexandria and Clara Lee at some point when it gets funded. But, I think that there's signalization changes. Like I said, I know that, you had mentioned earlier in your conversation that you can, when you look at certain things, you can then go back and decide whether you need to tweak the timings on it. Your system is adaptive where it sees stuff, and I notice it. I see it. I travel the corridor every single day, but I still think there's some operational and safety type improvements that can be made at some of these intersections. Clara Lee being one of them, Lockwood and 419, not so much, but Lockwood and Mitchell Hammock specifically. I know we're making some, like I said, those are areas that you're making some improvements in, but the last thing I can think of now is that we're going to have 2 left turns that have a free movement on an open green, conflicting with the rights. So
We can always look at possible improvements. One thing we haven't mentioned as part of the conversation, so you've got the city looking at access and you got NSYNC in place, but actually the county still supports all of our signalized intersections. And we can ask them to look at improvements, changes here and there. All I need is, somebody to ask me, and usually I'll have them run and look at it. They have a number of engineers who are much more versed in the science. I mean, it's actually a science to them as far as the signalization of intersections. They look at these things. I mean, you mentioned Clara Lee and Mitch Hammock, and I apologize because I can't articulate the reason, but he actually explained it to me one day why the movement that you just explained, why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And to me, I agree with you, it doesn't make sense. But from a timing standpoint, he explained it to me why it is that way, and it had to be that way.
It's split phase.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I've
Split
heard
phase,
that.
there was, yeah.
Yeah, it's a term called split phase. We lead the southbound lefts with their own arrow, then we go green ball, then we let northbound go. So if I have to add another exclusive left turn phase, I can't do it because you got a shared lane, you got a shared through and left.
see, I wouldn't look at them as they would be consecutive. They wouldn't be concurrent. Where you literally stop the traffic coming out of Oviedo on the park and then allow the free movement left and right or through, from Clara Lee. It's personal to me because I'm on it.
I can get you the explanation if you'd
I'm
like
on it
it.
twice a day, yeah.
I'll get them to write it down. I can send
and
it.
it's, and the problem is that the pedestrian movements on that are predominantly on the east side of the intersection where the left turn is constant. They because I don't know if they just can't see them. They're just far enough out that they're not seeing them. But
They're pretty wide.
I've seen multiple people either had to get the car stopped or they had to jump back because they have a car coming at them that tried to shoot the left. Even though the Clara Lee has a right turn, green right, has a green straight, they still want to come into that inside lane. They want to You know, they're not going to come all the way across, but they figure there's 2 lanes there, he's got one, I got the other, forget the pedestrian, so. Okay, but I didn't mean to get off the tangent, but I guess I was looking at, these were kind of things that, you know, you're not actively looking at these things until you really hear somebody say something about it or get an active complaint or.
Yeah, our primary goal right now is capital improvements,
Yeah.
safety and access. I don't have the staff or expertise in-house to look at that kind of stuff.
One thing I
That's what
think
you
we
rely on.
haven't,
I can't.
we haven't really touched on with the traffic is the through traffic. I was recently talking with Brian Cobb and the mayor and found out there was a new study that showed there was something like, I want to say it's 15,000
Yeah.
cars a day coming 419 into the city and going through the city. Can you talk to us about that? Do you know what the study I'm talking about?
No, I'm not familiar with that
It's,
stuff.
if I'm not mistaken, it's the most recent counts, is that, you know, by the time that our our eastern threshold off 419, you know, the typical counts are showing that there's 15,000 cars that are coming to that point, you know, before. Now, that may be a daily amount, at least it's not a peak amount, I don't think, but.
It's like a license plate survey, isn't it? I think that's how they do it, based on license plates. I mean, that's about the only way you can, for sure, know where they're coming from. It's probably a county study.
Yeah, to know that it's cut through, that would be the only.
Yeah.
I think what,
Volume count could be a two-road stationary count.
I thought that's
Okay.
what, I thought it was just a static count, you know, tube count, but.
I had heard in the past up to 40% at peak could be from outside the city, coming in through Mitchell Hammock.
I believe that.
And we can't change that.
No, there's no way.
Unless somebody builds Chapman and gives them an alternative east-west route.
Options.
That ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, connectivity, right?
no more cul-de-sacs.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
I just wish we.
Or McCulloch, I said Chapman, McCulloch.
Eastbound, right past the Yale House, coming up to 434. I don't know why that left lane just seems such a long, there's a little grade there that this is Florida. Why? It's driving me nuts. There's nobody more critical of traffic than me right now. you know?
Which direction did you say?
Going eastbound or westbound,
Right
Mitchell?
Before you get, going eastbound, before you get to 434.
AM or
In
PM?
front of the ale house?
Yeah, right up from the Yale House and
Okay.
Boston Market there
Yeah.
across the street.
I take Mitchell Hammock every morning, and
It's such a big gap.
yeah, I stay on the far left lane past the Wawa, because there's always someone's going to slam on their brakes to turn in the Wawa at the last second.
Yeah, right.
So I stay on the left lane, all the way past the Sod Farms, all the way past Lake Jessup Light, and I kind of time it to see, okay, who's going to be the person that's going to wait to turn right, and then I go into the center.
But you're right.
lane.
Right after you get past the ale house, that right lane just clears right up.
Yeah, it's, I don't know what, you know, and I've watched it to see if, and because I like watch, I see that kind of stuff. How many people actually turned either into Oviedo in the park or went up to Oviedo Boulevard and they felt like they had to stay
I
in
noticed we
that
took
left
away
lane.
that turn lane, that right.
I see the density gain there at the window there.
It's still there, the right.
No, but they took that triangle out.
Oh, the porch house, yes, the state did that.
It's the gap there.
Yeah, no,
I have a tech question for you guys, and maybe this will benefit the board. Does it make sense from a capacity and an operational improvement to connect continuous right turn lanes? Where it makes sense? Because right now, with almost every project that we have, we ask
The
for
decel lane.
a decel lane.
What was the question?
Oh, to have one long right
connect
turn.
the
To
decel
have,
lanes that
to
we already
identify
have.
a section of a roadway that has a lot of congestion and there's little pockets of right turn lanes, decel lanes, does it make sense from a capacity and an operational standpoint to identify a certain number of individual right turn lanes that go into individual developments to have a continuous right turn lane, at least
dedicated.
up to the signal?
It does help the main line because it provides more capacity for the through. What it penalizes, though, are the people that are coming out of each one of the driveways making the right turn because there's less of a gap for them to be able to turn in and be able to merge in with the rest of the main line.
Because I know there's been a couple of near misses as I'm commuting into work, because they are going into what is what they think is the right turn lane to go onto 434, but it's actually the new one that's going into the old Albertsons Shopping Center. So once they realize that that's just a right turn just for that driveway, they jump right back into the through traffic.
I know that intersection. The issue with that is that when it was a free right before, it was kind of a higher speed access point because there was no stop condition, because basically we had a right turn that was actually into our own lane. So, it was a pretty fast movement, where now people have to stop before they make a right onto 434. The other problem with that is that because that plaza has no left turn, that is the only left turn lane out of the thing. If you put a free right through there, they would, not only would they have a problem people just making a right out of it, but anybody that thinks they're going to be able to get across Mitchell Hammock and go westbound left, that would be
Yeah, maybe not
That
at
would be
that
bad.
particular location, or maybe a combination of connecting the intermittent rights, and then we're at the full access points having a flashing pedestrian, a flashing signal to alert drivers approaching that they need to stop at the access point.
I think a much better solution is we have a frontage road that connects from 426,
That's a much more
426
expensive
all the way to the Albertson, well, the new development, so. Yeah. With a connector that goes
Yeah, but I
back
was
to
going to say,
Alexandria.
if you do that.
Actually, we've,
you remove the
VHB,
hotel lane
Taquan's
function.
company, not his group, but the other group that I work with has actually done an access management study for me on Mitchell Hammock, and they've actually shown the beginnings of a frontage road, especially there on the north side. We've got where Flagler Center has gone in.
Yeah.
Because there's actually space, there's 100 feet of right-of-way all down through there, and you actually could fit a frontage road across that section. And at the beginnings of it, I think, are there actually at Flagler Center. You could make it work.
How far would it go east?
You could run it all the way from Norma to, what's the name of the road? On the way to 426, that,
The little,
Westgate, what is it?
thank you, Westgate Square.
Yeah, where you go
Yep.
back
You could,
way
you
into
could run,
Habaneros.
you could make it run that far, because that's all in city right away.
That'd be nice.
That would still be at 430.
I went into Culver's the other day, and I had to make a right out, go up, down 426 to come all the way back to, just to get to here, so.
Well, yeah, we're getting ready to make some
Changes.
striping improvements on Mitchell Hammock, which will come, if I can get the pricing down and get it good, that will limit the left-hand turns out of Oviedo Point and Flagler Center. They're going to go away. Because that cross movement, actually, most people don't know sorry, getting off topic here, but the 5 lanes on Mitchell Hammock are barely 11 feet wide.
Right.
So that's why when you see people trying to make U-turns out of that
Okay.
center lane, it's not enough room to do it. So because of Oviedo Point and Flagler Center, the way their existing driveways, the way they line up, if you try to turn left out of there, you can't turn left in and turn left out and have all them meet at the same point, not with a lane barely 11 feet wide. So from a safety standpoint, we're going to cut off the left outs. So in Oviedo Point, you'll have to go through the cross access to Wawa to get 426 to come out and go, which you can get to the signal that way easily. But Flagler Center, they have the 2 access points. So their left out will move down to the eastern entrance, which actually we're looking to set that up for future development. That will be the main access point for everything on especially on the south side. That way, it's spaced just far enough from the signal at 426 to set up another signal at that point in the future.
Good question, yeah,
Yeah.
that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And that Wawa,
FYI.
entrance has got to be done something with. There's going to be a major accident there one of these
That's
days.
something else,
Do we have anything else?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming and
Yes, thank you.
sitting here under all our questions.
I do think that the board has a lot of ability, especially if the comp plan is being rewritten, to have a say in the policy and help determine, just how these developments and these traffic studies are going to be conducted with respect to the site plans, when you get to see the site plans, and look to see if there's an opportunity for cross-access. As Teresa mentioned, connectivity is going to be a key benefit to the city. Stop building the glorified cul-de-sacs for the developments, create more of a grid, create more of a network, so that vehicles do have an option to go different ways and not all be funneled into a single road.
When I was the senior planner at the City of Tallahassee's Growth Management Department, every single one of our projects, one of the requirements in the code was they had to build an interconnect. Even if it interconnected to a wooded lot, they'd have to build it and leave it so that
Right.
there's
So
connections.
future use.
Yep,
Yeah.
you just leave
And
it
Thursday
stubbed
night's
out.
meeting is canceled, right?
Just leaves
Where's
it
that?
stubbed out.
Yeah, that, I've worked in other cities that did the same thing. That was, it was mandated, you know, and, you know, one of the things you said was that, you know, as a board, like I said, there's only certain things that we have access to or input on, and that is, you know, comp plan, land development, you know, code changes. Obviously, those are our primary functions, but from a site development standpoint, you know, we're only going to see something if it has
Percentage.
a deviation or a DA that's associated with it, you know, that needs to, you know, be approved, you know, so, and then again, at staff level, they're looking at it that when they review these things, and again, I'm paraphrasing, in my opinion, that it meets the code, you know, it meets all the criteria, and there's nothing more that we can do, and that's why it goes back to some of the stuff that we have in our policies, even though they're there, they're not necessarily enforceable or can be mandated without, you know, coming up with somebody saying you're not providing me the same, you know, rights and regulations that everybody else gets. So that's why, you know, we kind of decided to do this, you know, I think that's why I pushed for it, so that we have an opportune time to, you know, get in on the beginning of the development of the comp plan, you know, not wait until
It gives us a better
provides
roadmap, too.
Yeah, provides us the first draft of it, and then, you know, we try to, at that point, we're kind of behind the curve. So, thank you.
Teresa, at what point would this part of the comp plan come before us for the rewrite?
Well, when we have a draft, I mean, we can have work sessions for specific elements when that is approaching. We have,
But are we talking 3 months out, 6 months out, a year out?
A year.
Depends on funding.
yeah, at this point, we are in the budget process. Rewrite of the comp plan will have to be approved by the budget. So we are requesting that budget. We don't know if it's going to be, you know, approved. So we're still in the beginning of the process of the budget. And if that is granted, at this point, we are updating some of the plans. So the water supply plan is being, we have the draft, right?
Are you doing that?
You had asked,
The water supply.
we're doing the updates
The
Part of the
to,
concept use permit update, I believe.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a meeting for that. So,
Like, are they doing it, or am I doing it?
No, we're doing the
I
policy.
knew it was part of what we were doing, I guess didn't. the way you
because
said
for
it,
the
like
comp
we were
plan,
doing
we
it.
have to have all the background information, all the master's plans have to be approved. So we had, the transportation master
Yeah,
plan
like-
was updated in 2017.
You're doing the tech, we're doing the
We have
policies.
the water supply, we will have to check the Parks and Rec master plan, although we know that we have, you know, plenty of capacity there, but we will have that updated. So we need to have that background information to be able to inform the elements of the code, of the comp plan.
Based on population projections.
So, obviously, this was a very informative, you know, thank you for putting this on and getting us all together.
I agree.
Bob, and ask you, what are you going to do for us next kind of question. So, so while we have, you know, fairly a good consensus, maybe a hope that, you know, something that we can do to move forward, obviously, this still comes down to a council decision, you know, on what they're going to, you know, what staff recommends, working with council. Lonnie, on an item like this, where we're working towards a comp plan, whatever, a recommendation to do something different with our comp plan, to, you know, change a policy, to, is this something that we can do? Can we have a work session with council to discuss that kind of stuff? But, you know, we're not,
Sure, you could do that.
Or can we just meet on our own and make a recommendation?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You are in charge of the comprehensive planning program with the city, so you can meet on your own and generate recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not, I understand that part, and it's not so much, I'm basically being selfish in this case, that basically I want to be able to impart my will onto council of what we want to get done. So, and for all intents and
You
purposes,
can ask for a joint work session.
you know what I'm saying, is that, I would like us
Everything
to,
is due joint work sessions with
yeah.
Well, that might be an idea then.
Well, I'm just saying.
No, I agree.
If we continue to do this and develop something that we feel is worthwhile and proactive, and we want to push the agenda, I just don't want to send it in an email or a document.
No, you send it through staff.
I think we
Yeah,
should.
but you're right, at least we can reflect our,
There's nothing that restricts us from,
No,
on those kind of things,
I can tell
working
you
jointly.
recently in Sanford, for example, the Historic Preservation Board had some issues and asked for a joint work session with the city commission, and they had it.
Yeah.
And it's very fruitful, actually.
that probably would be. I mean, at least we get all together on the same page, right?
Yeah, I'm
Opposed to
not
being
saying we
on
do this
opposite
next week,
pages.
but I'm just saying, this is, somewhere down the line, we ought to think.
Before you do that, I'll tell you what to do, but have yourself together.
Yeah, we
Or
need to
have our ducks in a row, is that what you're trying to say, Lonnie?
We need to have our ducks in a row.
Absolutely.
We need to have a plan, an action plan going forward that we want to present, and obviously try to get buy-in, or.
At least we
if they're
should
gonna
meet
tell us
together,
that
we should have our own work session, come to a consensus, and then have the work session with the, so that we do know that we have the right roadmap that we want to present, opposed to your roadmap, my roadmap, everybody else's roadmap, just have one roadmap to present. United front.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else?
You know,
Thanks, staff.
Thank you.
For doing this.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys for
Thank you.
coming and answering our questions. If there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
We stand adjourned.